Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and you are listening to the 8th part of my series on the Hermetica. So this is a series that I've dedicated to the philosophy of Hermes, Hermes Trismegistus, and what is sometimes loosely referred to as the Hermetica, which is a collection of philosophical teachings that are attributed to Hermes. So the reason that we're doing this course, which I recommend, by the way, that if this is the first episode that you're listening to, notice I said this is part 8, so you're going to want to go back to the beginning and listen to part 1 through 7 first. You could listen to any part individually, but they will make more sense if you listen to them sequentially, because a lot of the concepts build on one another. So the reason we're doing this, which reminds me to put the presentation up on the screen, is to get a sense of what the teachings of Hermes were, because Hermes is the legendary founder of horoscopic astrology. We have most existing source texts from the Hellenistic era, the earliest founding era of horoscopic astrology, saying that the material originally came from Hermes Trismegistus. So today, we are looking at 2 sets of topics. One is called the universal and the particular, and the other is called the incarnation of the soul. These are 2 chapters that come from the Hermetica, and so every episode we take a look at 2 different chapters and break down the philosophy little by little. Now, one of the things that you can do if you're following along with this series is to pick up the version of the text that I'm using throughout this course, which is by Timothy Freck and Peter Gandy. And this is an edition of the Hermetica that I really like because it's very accessible. It is very easy for beginners. I find that that's useful because this is complicated philosophical territory, and many people may find it overwhelming to try to approach the original dialogues, which are very dense and difficult. So what I like about what Peter Freck and or Timothy Freck and Peter Gandy did with this is they condensed the main teachings of Hermes into short little chapters that are kind of like poetic and like prose poetry. So as we're going throughout, we're making our way through the text 2 chapters at a time. And as we're going along, what we're really trying to do is figure out, so what was the spiritual purpose of astrology? Why were astrologers originally doing astrology? What did they believe? Why did they practice what they did? This is not a book that tells you how to read a birth chart. It's a book that tells you about the philosophical, metaphysical, and spiritual basis of the zodiac, of astrology, and the metaphysics that people were thinking about thousands of years ago. So whether you believe it or not is up to you. But for me, as I take the philosophy both in the yoga philosophy in the East and also Hermetic philosophy in the West, I take them both very seriously as a part of my practice. And so I find that, for me, it was very useful to have this series of texts really as an anchor for understanding my role as an astrologer and recommitting to that role regularly. So what I do in every episode is I first read the first chapter aloud so that you can hear it. The reason that it's important to read chapters aloud is that and not just summarize them, is that when you're reading sacred text, the sound vibration entering your ears, it works on you. It works through the soul, and it helps to create a sort of vibration within you. I know that might sound sort of tinfoil hat for some people, but it's the same thing with mantras in the East. We listen to sacred scriptures, and they have a way of staying with us when they're read aloud, and we can really take them in as a listener. That's a little different reading because some of us skim or some of us get distracted. But when someone reads, it's easier to just really dial in. So we read the first chapter and then we talk about it, and then read the second chapter and talk about it. So the first chapter today is called The Universal and the Particular. And in this chapter, Hermes is going to start talking about archetypes and the way in which individual souls inhabit archetypal forms. So here it goes. Autumn arranged the constellations of the zodiac in harmony with the movements of nature and charged them with producing all the forms of the animals. When these gods had used their different powers, there emerged four-footed beasts, creeping things, fishes and winged birds, grass and flowering herbs, all according to their different natures and each containing the seed of the continuance of their species. Every living thing has its own unique form given to it by the power of the zodiac. This form is appropriate to its species, yet each is individual. The human race, for example, shares a common universal form by which we know that a man is a man. Yet all human beings have a distinctly different particular form of which no two are entirely alike. Each particular form is unique because it inhabits a unique time and place. The particular forms change in every moment of every hour as the gods of the zodiac revolve in their celestial circle. The universal forms do not change, just as the constellations remain the same. But instant by instant, the particular forms transform as the sphere of heaven changes as it turns. The sky is wet then dry, cold then hot, bright then dark. But these rapidly alternating forms are all subsumed under the universal, unchanging form of the sky. The earth is ever changing, generating, producing, yielding different crops, yet it remains the earth. Water may be standing or flowing, but it is still water. The human body is an earthly temple constructed by the power of the zodiac, which makes myriad forms from simple archetypes. There are 12 signs of the zodiac, and the forms they produce fall into 12 divisions. They are, however, inseparably united in their action. Nature makes the human body so that its constitution resonates with the patterns of the stars in such a way that they mutually affect one another. When we are born, the planetary gods who are at that time on duty as ministers of birth take charge of us. These particular powers that change according to the rotation of the planets make their way in through the body and mold the shape of our souls. They penetrate our nerves and marrow, veins and arteries, even our innermost organs. So there's the first chapter of our lesson for the week on the universal and the particular. And like I said, in this chapter, what Hermes is doing is he's setting out to describe universal forms, or what we sometimes call archetypes, and the particular instances of those forms, or the souls that inhabit those forms. My apologies, I just had to pause really briefly. So let me repeat that. So in this chapter, Hermes has set out to describe universal archetypes and then particular instances of those archetypes or souls that inhabit individual forms within a universal category, like a particular human is both universally human, but also has a very particular human shape. And this is a result, Hermes is explaining to us here, of the fact that individual souls are incarnating into different species that are categorized more broadly as a kind of universal form. Now, he says that the constellations of the zodiac are in harmony with the movements of nature, and both are charged with producing all forms of animals. So there's two forces, basically, that Hermes is talking about that is responsible with the production of all the different forms of life. He said, one is the zodiac, the kind of constellations of the zodiac. And the other is the forces of material nature, which might be thought of as the elements of nature. So first of all, the idea is that the universe is, everything that you see in the universe is a combination of fixed patterns that are built from kind of almost like divine, celestial, mathematical, or geometrical patterns, like this image that I have here. But simultaneously, there is also this theory of nature, or this force of nature, and that would be like the flow of different kinds of natural forces. These two together are responsible for the production of the species of life in Hermetic philosophy. Now, these are gods. These forces are considered, they're forces, but they're personified as well. So they're not just, it's not just that, well, the god is mythical and it's really just some abstract force. No, it's both a kind of force or energy and a personified being. All of these things are thought of as gods, literally, though they can also express themselves in terms of energy. It's very important because sometimes in our kind of modern rational or empirical way of thinking, we like to think, oh, they were just anthropomorphizing things way back then, and there are no such things as gods. There's just forces and energies, and then they just get called gods because it's just like a literary metaphor or something like that. But no, ancient thinkers were smarter than that. They attributed both energetics and actual beingness, like you or I are an actual being. The universe is not just a collection of material forces. It's comprised of beings and relations between beings. Those beings can also express themselves in terms of material forces or energies. It's a very important distinction. So when these gods use their different powers, see, gods and their powers, so they're coupled together, all manner of creatures came, and also came equipped to propagate their species. So the species of life are created in this way through the constellations of the Zodiac and the movements of nature, the gods and their powers. And they also come equipped to propagate their species, to continue the creation of their own species. Every living thing has a unique form that is eternal, which comes from the Zodiac. Why do they come from the Zodiac? Because the Zodiac, as we'll see, as Hermes reminds us shortly, is comprised of constellations that don't move and don't change, fixed arrangements of patterns in the stars that are unmoving compared to everything else that's moving and changing and fluctuating. So you have a picture of something eternal, and then you have a picture of something temporal, or something that's always changing and impermanent. So there's the juxtaposition between the universal and the particular. We see this every day, for example, when we see the uniform motion of the sky, or the primary motion, the diurnal rotation, the Earth moving on its axis. Everything's moving through the sky in one uniform, singular circle, unchanging. The fixed stars are a part of that, the constellations. But then you also see the individual distinct movements of the planets, the secondary motions of the planets, which are very diverse, different speeds, different luminosity cycles, different periods of rising and setting, different synodic cycles with the sun, retrograde periods. So they represent the world of fluctuation and change. And so you have the juxtaposition between the universal and the particular in the two main motions that we see in the sky every day, from the planets and from the rotation of the Earth on its axis. So we have a similar thing being said here by Hermes. Every living thing has a unique form that is eternal, which comes from the Zodiac. So every living thing is part of, say, a species, a bird or a human or whatever. And that form is unique and is in some ways eternal. And remember, you have to remember that although the word creation is used in the Hermetica, like the universe was created, it's cyclical. So it's, in a sense, it's eternal. It's not, there's never really a beginning or an ending to the entire cycle of creation. And so every living thing in the universe has, in a sense, an eternal form. But sometimes people say, what about dinosaurs? They're not here anymore. Yeah, but you can still draw pictures of dinosaurs, right? You know what a dinosaur is. We have ideas about what dinosaurs are. So and similarly, any species of life that is extinct, for example, it's not that they never will never exist again either. The idea is that there are cycles of appearance and disappearance, and that all forms of life in the cosmos are in some sense eternal, even if they have periods of incarnating and then dying. So humanness is in some ways eternal, just like an apple is in some way eternal. There is some sense in which all forms in the universe are undying and unchanging. And this is thought to be related to the zodiac because it's comprised of fixed patterns of stars that don't change, or that we know the stars move very gradually over a long, long period of time, but that's the basic symbolism. However, each member of the form or species is unique. There are no two exactly alike. So there are humans, but there are many different humans, and none of us are exactly alike. Hermes is going to allude to this in the next chapter as well, or Hermes alluding to this now, and we'll address it in the next chapter. But this is because each being is not just a cookie cutter or a robot, but a unique soul. Every living thing is inhabited by something that has a soul. So because each unique particular also inhabits a particular time and place, Hermes says, the particular form changes in every moment of every hour as the gods of the zodiac revolve in their celestial circle. So this is really interesting. So on the one hand, there's humans, for example, but then there's particular humans. And the particularity has to do with the fact that the particular is in relation to an individual soul. Every particular thing that's a part of a greater class or species is still completely individual, even though it's participating in something that many other beings in the same species share. And not only that, but the particular form, like my body or your friend's body or your mother's body or whatever, the particular form that we each inhabit that's totally unique is also fluctuating constantly. And the constant changes that happen on the cellular level, on the bodily level, our body's like a little ecosystem that's just constantly moving, right? So the particular form is always changing. It's born, it grows, it grows old and it dies. But that continuous change of the particular form is also governed by the gods, as the gods of the zodiac revolve in their celestial circle. So the constellations, again, here we have the constellations of the zodiac, that great circle that doesn't change, where the fixed patterns of the stars are more or less set, that determines the universal forms, like humanness. But the individual planets in their individual movements, rotating through circles in different speeds and variabilities, those are said to govern all of the particular forms, my lifetime, your karma, my karma. And as those cycles move along, so our particular forms and our particular experiences in a particular form of humanness change. Sometimes people will say, that we grow, right? Oh, well, we use that we use that a lot. Like, oh, well, I'm growing up, or I'm really, things are growing. Technically speaking, the correct word is change. Things are changing, not growing, because it's a cycle. Growth and decay are simultaneously a part of one another all the time, because forms move in circles and cycles like that. So there's an appearance of growth, but it's, from a larger perspective, it's really inseparable from decay. And so it's change. That's one of the main things. The universal forms do not change, just as the constellations do not change, but instant by instant, the particulars transform as the sphere of heaven turns. So humanness is in some ways unchanging, but the particular forms of humanness are always changing. Similar idea. Constellations not changing, planets always changing and moving. The weather and elements on Earth all change and alternate constantly, but they're all subsumed under the universal unchanging form of the sky. So now we're getting a little bit of a spiritual hierarchy. Yes, there's fluctuation and change all of the time, but something greater unites it all, which is that it's all subsumed or taking place under the universal unchangingness of the sky. So Similarly, the earth always changes but remains the earth. Water may flow, but it's still water. Water may flow and trickle and move, but it's still water. So the idea here is that what we're trying to do spiritually is to recognize the unchanging thing of the unchanging element of who we are, our conscious soul. That is in some ways like the water that's still water, even if it's moving, the earth that's still earth, even if it's changing, the sky that subsumes everything happening under it, even though there's all sorts of fluctuations happening in the sky all the time, clouds, all the stuff. So similarly, Hermetic philosophy is telling us that part of why we study astrology is so that we might be able to recognize the larger whole in which all of these fluctuations and changes are happening. And that grounds us in our essential nature. And that's a very stabilizing thing. It's a platform from which spiritual life may be cultivated. So he goes on to say that the human body is an earthly temple built from the zodiac, which makes myriad forms from simpler archetypes. So we also get this idea that that complex forms are made from series of simpler forms. They combine in unique ways to make larger forms. I can attest to this from, for example, getting my daughter a set of Duplos, right? There's like, a few different basic kinds of blocks, in like a little Duplo set. But when she combines them in different ways, like all different kinds of forms emerge. So similarly, we have the idea of this 12-fold division, like 12 different types of parts in the zodiac. And Hermes is saying that they mix and mingle in interesting ways. And they are always bound together, even if they're being remixed in different ways. They all have interconnection with each other. And so in that sense, you can never really look at a birth chart, by the way, and isolate something entirely. I mean, you may have to do so for the sake of practicality, but there's nothing that's not connected in a birth chart, right? Because it's a circle, because it's an expression of these, it's sort of like anything that a birth chart is expressing is made out of the same Duplos. You know what I mean? They're just being rearranged in different ways. So similarly, they are always united in working together in whatever they express. And so when we read birth charts, one of the things, esoteric sort of teachings that comes through is starting to recognize the inherent harmony that is there within the whatever form is expressed through the intermingling of all the parts. And that's what takes us from seeing myself as just some individual isolated creature to seeing myself as a part of a greater whole. And that's also the spiritual point of astrology in many ways. Nature makes the body, Hermes says, so that its parts resonate with the patterns of the stars and they mutually affect one another. So this is also very interesting because we have this idea that the body is comprised of all these different parts. Your particular form is comprised of all of these different parts, but those parts, because they are made of this celestial stuff, this archetypal stuff, the particular form that the soul inhabits has this kind of resonance with the heavens. And therefore it becomes a medium for the ongoing changes that occur in the particular form over the course of a lifetime. We might call it our karma, is happening because our body is built of the resonance of that celestial stuff. So as that celestial stuff keeps going, we resonate with it within ourselves, and the movements play out in terms of the unfolding of our destiny, karma, or fate. So there's this sort of mutual resonance between the stars. And what's very important is that because we have free will, because we have agency, and not every last thing is determined, we're also creating new karma, new actions and outcomes in the present. We're also reacting to things that happen that are fated or destined. There's a very mysterious way in which our actions and choices are also connecting through the celestial constituents in our body, the way our form is made up of celestial stuff, and the choices we make within that little matrix of our karmic field is also in resonance with the heavens. And so it becomes a bit like a choose your own adventure book, right? We're navigating transits. We are responding to the ongoing unfolding of planetary cycles after birth with free will, but we're also doing it within the parameters of a certain fate or destiny that's already set in motion that can't be undone. So the fact that Hermes makes that all apparent in like a sentence is pretty amazing, because he just says nature makes the body so that its parts resonate with the patterns of the stars, the different parts of the body resonating. The word resonance, right? To resonate with the sound of something. It resonates, the parts resonate with the patterns of the stars, and they mutually affect one another. So there's a connection between the two. But remember, an individual soul is not the same as its individual particular form, because it will have many different forms, many different particular incarnations, and many different species. So our choices within the form and its unfolding have this ability to also work with and have this kind of mutual affectation with the stars, with the ongoing unfolding of the stars. So our choices really do matter, but they're also bound up in a particular karma that's already been established by our particular form and a particular karma. Again, to really sit with that for a while, it doesn't make astrology easy, because the question of fate or free will you can't just say, oh, it's all fated, or oh, it's all open and you're just co-creating, making your own reality. It's there's a bit of both, and it's very difficult to say how much freedom you have, how much something is fated. People who act as though they know that are mostly lying. That's just my observation of doing full-time astrology for 10 years. So at any rate, think about that. This is one of those pieces in the Hermetica where I really encourage people to sit with this chapter and read it a few times. He says that these particular powers that change according to the rotation of the planets make their way in through the body and mold the shape of the soul. So you see, the soul that's in the body is also a living being. It's not just one static thing. It has a nature, and that nature can also change. It changes as we make choices, and that is then reflected in the particular form and in the way that the fate or destiny of the particular form unfolds. So and yet, again, there's a reason that we're in a particular form and we don't have any memory of exactly choosing it. There are many choices that are here to be continuously played out that have already been set in motion by our souls previously. So the soul is learning and growing and changing through its forms. And that's happening in very mysterious ways. But it's the very clear thing that we get is the universal form or species that we're part of, and then we have the particular form. Both of one is created by the zodiac, the other is governed by the planets. And they can affect. It says, Hermes says, it affects us down to our health, our body, our innermost organs, everything. That's our physical form is completely embedded in this sort of celestial archetypal matrix. So, all right. So that's a pretty vast chapter if you think about it. Now we're going to go on to the next chapter, which is called the Incarnation of the Soul. So this chapter is another really interesting one where Hermes is now going to endeavor to talk about the incarnation of the soul in the human form in greater depth. So here we go. Incarnation of the soul. All souls are part of one soul, which is the soul of the cosmos. Souls all have one nature. They are neither male nor female. Such differences of sex arise only in the body. In the world above, there are two gods who are servants of Atum's goodness, called the Keeper of Souls and the Conductor of Souls. The Keeper is in charge of disembodied souls. The Conductor sends down these souls from time to time into physical incarnation. Nature works alongside these gods, making mortal vessels into which souls are poured. Nature also has two assistants called memory and skill. Memory ensures that nature creates individual forms that are copies of the primal universal forms. Skill ensures that the individual frame is fashioned in conformity with the soul which will embody it. Seeing to it that lively souls have lively bodies, sluggish souls have sluggish bodies, powerful souls have powerful bodies. The soul, which is spiritual, has its own wrappings, which are also spiritual. These are coats made of air. When such coats are thin and transparent, the soul is intelligent. When they are dense and muddied, like the air in stormy weather, the soul cannot see far, but is only aware of its immediate predicament. The differences in character of the pharaohs are not determined by the nature of their soul, for all kingly souls are godlike, but by the gods that escort the soul into incarnation. Souls of such quality that incarnate for so high a purpose do not descend without attendance, for divine justice knows how to assign to each his due, even when exiled from the happy land. When the soul is accompanied by warlike gods, this pharaoh will wage war. When the gods are peaceful, he will maintain peace. When they are musical, he will make music. When they are just, he will rule wisely. When they are lovers of truth, he will be a philosopher. For souls, by necessity, cling to the temperament of the gods who bring them down to earth. For when they sink into the human condition, they forget their own nature and are conscious only of the disposition of those who have shut them in this mortal tomb. The forces which accompany the soul do not arrive together. Some enter with the soul at the moment of birth and act on the irrational parts of the soul. The purer forces arrive at adolescence and cooperate with the rational part of the soul. I have seen a vision of souls about to be shut up in bodies. Some of them wailed and moaned. Some struggled against their doom like noble beasts caught by crafty hunters and dragged away from their wild home. One shrieked and looking up and down exclaimed, "O heaven, source of being, bright shining stars and unfailing sun and moon, light and life breath of the one, all that you share, all you that share our home. How cruel it is that we are being torn away from such celestial splendor. We are to be expelled from this holy atmosphere and from the blissful life we live here, to be imprisoned in a mean and sorry place. What hard necessities wait for us? What hateful things will we have to do to meet the needs of a body that will quickly perish? Our eyes will see little and only through the fluid which these orbs contain. And when we see our vast heavenly home contracted to a size as small as an eye, our sorrow will never cease. We shall not even see clearly, for we have been condemned to darkness. And when we hear our brothers and sisters blowing with the wind, we shall grieve that we are no longer breathing in unison with them." That's a heavy chapter, but some really good insights that come from it. In this chapter, Hermes sets out to talk about the incarnation of the soul into the human body. He starts by saying that all souls, though completely individual, completely unique, no two alike, are neither male nor female, and that such differences are only of the body, are only things that get expressed when you're in a body. Properly speaking, Hermes in other places alludes to the fact that everything created from source that is unique, separate, eternally individual, and yet eternally part of the source are thought of as the kind of divine version of feminine, whereas the source itself is sort of thought of as the divine version of masculine. But this is not also to be understood as male or female. It's more like yin and yang in a kind of an eternal sense. But insofar as human sexuality is concerned, souls are neither male nor female. And all souls are a part of the cosmic soul. And that's very important, because remember that the cosmos itself is thought of as the second God, the one to which God creates for the sake of loving relationship. I mean, imagine you're God, you want to have another to relate with. And so creation is, in a way, you could think of the created second God who creates the cosmos in turn as a part of the expression of the need for a loving relationship, right? The creation of love, God capable of creating a loving relationship with an aspect, a separate aspect of himself or itself. So insofar as we are individual souls, we are also part of the cosmic soul, which is the second God. In the world above, there are two gods who are the servants of Atum's goodness, and they are the keeper of souls and the conductor of souls. The keeper is in charge of disembodied souls. So there are not it's not the case that souls, according to Hermes, are always incarnating. Sometimes souls will be kept in an unmanifest state. And there are, actually, this is common in Eastern philosophy as well. And then there's a conductor who will send down the souls who are ready for incarnation based upon the appropriate time, place, or cosmic circumstance. When the cosmic clock gets to the appropriate place for the soul to be appropriately situated in an appropriate body, according to the unfolding of karma in the universe, cause and effect, the cycle of cosmic law, then you'll be inserted into a new, method acting role. You'll get a new body. So the keeper keeps those souls that are not yet ready for an incarnation. They're waiting, so to speak. And then the conductor is the one who puts them into forms when they're ready. And that form is based upon, in at least, in Eastern philosophy, we don't have this clearly spelled out in the Hermetica, but it's definitely implied, is the time, place, and circumstance into which you're put has to do with the nature of your soul and your karma. So nature also accompanies these gods to craft the lifetime and body for the soul. There has to be a body and a family and a moment in history and a culture and a race and a socioeconomic status and everything that is perfect for the individual soul's karma. So nature, the forces of material nature also have two helpers, memory and skill. Memory helps nature shape the individual form in relation to the universal form. So for example, nature is shaping a form based on the memory of the universal form of humanness or horseness or appleness or whatever it might be. So the form is growing into it because there is some inherent memory of the universal archetype. And then skill helps nature shape the individual frame in conformity to the nature of the soul inhabiting it. So what type of human are you going to be? What type of circumstances will you be born into? So those things come together, and then the conductor of souls, the keeper releases the soul, the conductor puts it into its next body. So it's not necessarily the case that just right after you die, you go immediately into another body. But it's also said in Eastern philosophy, as I've heard it said this way a few different times, that the time is experienced very differently outside of, the material incarnation as opposed to once you're in a body. So it's not like you're sitting there like, oh man, I got 100 years. I just got to sit here. It's a little different. All right. So different souls get different bodies and situations relevant to their current karmic condition. What is their current karmic condition? It is the nature of the soul, what it's like, how it behaves, but most importantly, what it desires, what it currently wants. The universe is like an AI program that is designed to facilitate the exploration of our desires. But what Hermes is going to tell us in future chapters is that almost all those desires for a huge amount of people are rooted in the ignorance of not knowing that we are a part of God, not knowing that we're a part of the whole, and trying to act as though we are separate, that we can live forever, and that all of the temporary things we can try to get in this individual body, in this individual lifetime, are the pinnacle of happiness. You know what I mean? So insofar as each of us are born in a body, we're continuing the exploration of separative desires, meaning desires governed by the illusion of being alone and being temporary and only having a very short span of time to only enjoy things materially or to do things materially. As the soul starts to experience the results of those endeavors, it learns, because those endeavors, as we said in previous chapters, are governed by laws of karma, laws of justice, laws of truth. They're moral, so they teach us as we go. We can't ever die. We can't ever really be harmed, but we can go through experiences that are very, very difficult as we're learning and as we're seeing the results of our actions and our desires and what they really deliver, as opposed to what we think they're going to deliver. And then as that process continues, again, the soul may naturally start to inquire, well, what's the point? None of this is really working. What happens after this body dies, etc. And then when spiritual inquiry begins, that's when people generally start getting interested in things like astrology and other spirituality and religious experiences. Okay, so anyway, pharaohs are all godlike, he says. So there are differences, even though he says he's trying to explain here why pharaohs are different. Does that mean they're just normal souls? Because remember, back in the day, this comes from Egyptian wisdom. And so if you said a pharaoh was a normal person, you'd be in trouble, because a pharaoh is more like, an avatar, is more like the Dalai Lama, or potentially more, autocratic, and you don't want to mess with, you know what I mean? I don't know. But at any rate, the point is that Hermes here explains that pharaohs are of an elevated soul quality. They're closer to the nature of God. And so he says that their differences are not based on the nature of their soul, which is more and more purified already, but that the nature of their souls are similar to, their differences are according to the gods that come down, like they're celestial ministers that accompany them to be the incarnate pharaoh. Now, who knows? There's a history of astrologers tipping their hat politically to kings and emperors and pharaohs and things like that, because astrologers are often like court ministers and diviners to those figures. Their patrons are the pharaohs or the aristocrats or the elites. It's not always easy to say if in these texts, if we have an unflinching loyalty to the head of state. I think that that's questionable, but I will say that there is, in general, a belief that some souls who are meant to lead are of a purer, higher nature. Like the Dalai Lama, it's a higher evolution, spiritually speaking. And then the question has to be asked, well, what could account for the difference in their personalities? It's like, well, they're still an individual soul, but also their differences have to do with different kinds of celestial influences that come with them to be like their ministers, to help facilitate their teachings or their leadership. And that's what gives the different, lamas different personalities, for example. So you can think about it like that. Souls, he says, in general, cling to the nature of the gods that bring them down into an incarnation. So at the moment that you're born or that I'm born, there are also gods in our birth chart. We can look and see which particular gods we are likely to take after. That can be really, really strong in our charts. Sometimes that's looked at by planets on the midheaven or planets on the ascendant, or a planet that's very angular if no planets are close to those angles. Sometimes it's the sun or the moon. Sometimes the ruler of the ascendant. The ruler of the lot of fortune. There's different methods that ancient astrologers had of trying to figure out who the captain of the ship was, so to speak. And that might be thought of in the Hermetic sense as the nature of the gods that the soul is really clinging to through the particular bodily form which the gods govern and sort of dictate and bring along through material life. And he also says the forces which accompany the soul don't arrive together. They come in at separate stages in life. This is very important because it's an early theory about why the development of the soul occurs the way that it does psychologically. Kids aren't the same karmically as adults. And this plays out in my practice all the time. people will come in for a reading, and if I ask them about really big karmic events that happen when they're 4, most of the time it's not really about them. It's about their family or their environment. They can't really remember what was going on, right? So developmentally, karma and the development of the soul and our fate, it plays out in different ways at different stages. And as we grow, the ability to act rationally and respond to our fate with higher rational sophistication, as well as the ability to start navigating the course of our life with consciousness, which does have the power to create change. And we're not entirely bound by fate, remember. That increases as we age, and we also have the capacity to become more rational. And so some gods will also come in, some karma, some fate comes in later when we're able to more rationally meet it. It's sort of like saying, don't give a first grader a 12th grade test. Do you know what I mean? So there's Hermes is saying that as well. Some enter the soul at birth, others arrive later in life. Now, Hermes ends finally with a vision of souls about to be shut up in bodies. He says that they're suffering because they don't want to be in a form where they will only have a sliver of a glimpse or access to heaven, whereas in the state that they're in, they have a much clearer understanding of heaven or of the spiritual realm. This is very interesting because to me, this is one of the difficult parts of Hermetic philosophy that I watch people struggle with whenever they get into it. We don't want to imagine that our lives are prisons, but that's exactly the picture that Hermes gives us. He says, incarnation, though it's filled with beauty, is thought to be a departure from a divine realm. We're not actually human. We're spiritual. And to have to go through the experience of life and impermanence and then death for souls who have tasted being in a realm where there is no death is thought to be like prison. It's like, oh man, I don't want to go and do that. It's like, really, that's really hard work. It's really difficult. And the question as to why this happens is left unaddressed in this chapter, which is really interesting. But insofar as we're going into an incarnation, again, what Hermes is going to tell us in subsequent chapters is that it has to do with the things that we want to go and do that that are a part of the idea of being separate. He ends by saying, in this earthly realm, we are no longer breathing in unison with our brothers and sisters, which paints a picture of the heavenly realm as a place where there are multiple different souls connected with divinity, connected with God, and there is a kind of unison that's happening among those souls. It's very beautiful, and it never ends. So you can imagine then having to go into a body where you will temporarily experience the feeling of being separate from everyone and go and pursue desires that are mostly based on the illusion of being separate from everything. And that's painted as for many souls, not all. He says, I saw many souls that were really dreading this, that were really like, oh my God, like I don't want to have to do this. But this is a part of actually what compels the soul to incarnate, is that on some level, the soul needs this experience, or the soul, it's thought of as purifying experience. It's purifying, it's healing, it's educational, it's therapeutic. And it's also based on the fact that we have free will as souls, and so therefore can choose to go into a body if we want, a temporary body. That's our choice. And so there is also a sense in which our choices and our desires lead us into these incarnations, into these different method acting roles that we play. The other thing that's really interesting is he says that those souls that are at a stage, you might say, of evolution that is a little bit more intelligent, that's come along further in the process of going through these incarnations in bodies, will have a body that's lighter. They'll be effulgent. They'll sort of be closer to the spiritual nature. And you can tell because it's as though when you're with them, you can feel their spirit, or there's something spiritually tangible about the individual. And they know, the people know the difference between material things and spiritual things as well. And then he says people who are not like that, it's more like they have like a muddied quality, and they're only able to focus on exactly the material predicament in front of them. And that's where they get their sense of happiness from. That's where they get their sense of distress from. And they're just kind of mired in the muck of the immediacy of material life. So he sets that up too and says there's sort of two different ways that souls, they'll either be in a kind of a muddied state or moving towards a clearer state. So that's how he ends this chapter. Now, again, one of the reasons that I say that this is a difficult part for people is that we don't like to think of the world as a prison. It certainly has a punitive feeling that, and no one wants to look at flowers or sunshine or the grass or one another as, some kind of hellish, you know what I mean? Like I certainly don't look at life that way. But remember, you have to juxtapose this reality, this metaphysical reality, with what Hermes has told us about how we evolve within these experiences, which is to see that the beauty of the body is enabled because of the light of the sun that helps everything grow and flourish. The sunlight is created from, the cosmic mind from God, like that. So anything in this material world can become spiritualized when our consciousness shifts. And then it becomes part of how we start to appreciate and return to our original source. So it's a prison, but with a shift of consciousness, it also becomes a bridge, a shimmering, beautiful bridge across which we may return to our spiritual source by seeing divinity in everything. So there's those two. You have to take both those things. It's not just, well, it's either good or it's bad, right? You have to understand the way in which incarnations are like a prison, and also the way in which incarnations are shimmering with divinity and the opportunity, the really unique opportunity to inquire about spiritual things and to spiritualize the material stuff in life, which is the project of Hermeticism. So that's what I've got for you today. I hope that, as usual, that you are getting something good out of this series and that it's helping you connect in a deeper way to your love of astrology or your interest or curiosity in astrology. We have some chapters left to go. Not many, though. We're getting towards the end. The next two chapters are called Death and Immortality, and then Ignorance of the Soul. And this is where we now start to get much more deeply into the position of the soul, the need for the soul to evolve and grow from lifetime to lifetime, and the attainment of spiritual returning to our spiritual source, and also of the ignorance of the soul and why the soul incarnates based on certain kinds of ignorances. So it's really deep stuff coming up. I look forward to getting into it with you. And in the meantime, please feel free to leave your questions or comments on the YouTube feed. I love hearing from you guys. I love hearing how you're digesting the whole series. Make sure you read these chapters on your own a few times if you have the book. It really helps to embody the wisdom. So have a great week, and we'll be back together again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye.